Megyn Kelly, and we begin today with huge news that could change the direction of the Supreme Court for a generation of Americans. 81-year-old Justice Anthony Kennedy, who served on the High Court for more than 30 years, announcing he plans to retire next month. The news immediately had Democrats, Republicans, and of course President Trump positioning themselves for the bitter battle that will lie ahead to fill his vacant seat. Anytime a justice steps down, it is a big deal. But Justice Kennedy was often a key swing vote in critical cases. He's a conservative, but he's a moderate. He's a sort of a moderate conservative, so he's voted with the liberals many times on some important cases. His replacement will likely make the High Court much more solidly conservative for years, possibly for decades to come. NBC News White House correspondent Kristen Welker has more on this historic decision. Watch.
Overnight, President Trump saying he's ready for the Senate battle ahead.
Justice Kennedy's retirement makes the issue of Senate control one of the vital issues of our time. Democrats want judges who will rewrite the Constitution any way they want to do it and take away your Second Amendment.
But Democrats are already gearing up for a fierce fight with Roe v. Wade, gay rights, and voting rights at stake.
If the president nominates a right-wing fringe ideologue, it will galvanize the American people.
Many Democrats are still fuming after Republicans blocked former President Obama's pick, Merrick Garland, in 2016. At the time, Republicans led by Senate Leader Mitch McConnell argued the critical vote should wait until after the upcoming presidential election. Now, Democrats are turning the tables, saying the process should be put on hold until after this year's midterm elections.
Our Republican colleagues in the Senate should follow the rule they set in 2016. Not to consider a Supreme Court justice in an election year.
But Republicans argue since voters aren't electing a new president, Mr. Trump's Supreme Court pick should have a hearing. McConnell vowing swift action.
We will vote to confirm Justice Kennedy's successor this fall.
Republicans technically don't need any Democratic votes to confirm the president's nominee. Party leaders changed the Senate rules last year to nominate the president's first Supreme Court pick, Neil Gorsuch, with a simple majority. But the GOP can only afford to lose one vote, and some pro-abortion rights Republicans say Roe v. Wade will be critical.
I view Roe v. Wade as being settled law. It's clearly precedent, and I always look for judges who respect precedent.
Joining me now to discuss it, NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk, MSNBC national news correspondent Steve Kornacki, and MSNBC and NBC News legal analyst Mimi Rocah. Great to have you all here. So there's no question this is a huge deal. This is big. You know, sometimes we in the news say things are big and they're not that big. This is big.
You could tell by the immediate reaction where you had jubilation on one side and hair on fire on the other side. I mean, it immediately happened. And it's really interesting. You had the head of the Family Research Council, Tony Perkins, come out and say, this is going to turbocharge the evangelical vote. And he's right about that, but it's double-edged. This is going to turbocharge a lot of the vote coming up in midterms.
Well, that's the thing. So I was just reading some of the reaction online, Slate and some other left-leaning publications, calling it a judicial apocalypse, a catastrophe for liberals, a crisis. And one columnist over at the Daily Beast concluding there is nothing the Democrats can do to stop it. Do you think that's right?
I think it is, because the other wild card here, you say there's one Republican that Republicans can afford to lose on this. It's a Senate election year, and there are a number of Democratic senators who are running for re-election in states that were extremely pro-Trump. Talking about like West Virginia, Joe Manchin, a Democrat. Trump won the state by 42 points. So you have to ask the question here, if Democrats are trying to fight this thing, Joe Manchin is a few weeks away from facing the voters in a state that's that heavily pro-Trump. Is he really going to side with the Democrats in blockading a Trump nominee? You got Manchin, you got Heitkamp in North Dakota, Donnelly in Indiana. So I could see maybe Republicans at risk of losing one or two here. I see Democrats immediately at risk of losing three and maybe more.
Because this is an issue that will definitely galvanize the left. But my position is they've already been galvanized by Trump. Like, they're already excited to go and vote Democrat in November. But there's nothing, in my experience, that motivates the right like an open Supreme Court seat.
On the point of who it's galvanizing the most, I think you're right. Usually the Democrats are not, so focused on this as a voting issue. But here's why I think it's different this time. Obviously, Supreme Court vacancies come up, right? I mean, this isn't the first time that's happened. They come up even when you have Republican presidents. Yeah. But they don't come up when you have a president who is under investigation, criminal investigation. I mean, this is the first time that I know of that has happened. And you have a president who seems so out of control and lawless. And the Supreme Court...
I'm gleaning that you're a Democrat.
Well, but I'm also a former prosecutor, and I'm very, I look at things from the perspective of let's look at the rule of law. And that, to me, not from a Democrat or Republican point of view, but what's so frightening about this presidency is the absolute disrespect for the rule of law.
But he hasn't been indicted. He hasn't been charged with anything. He hasn't been impeached. And there's a process. So you can't say he doesn't get Supreme Court picks just because there's a suspicion around it.
No, I'm not saying that. But I'm talking about why it would galvanize Democrats, or not just Democrats, but people who view him as someone who has not been respecting the rule of law and who, frankly, denigrates law enforcement every day. I mean, his constant attacks on the FBI.
See, my position in response to that is that's why we have a confirmation process, right? So a president doesn't just get to say, Stephanie Gosk, Supreme Court Justice, right?
Sadly.
Although you'd have my vote.
I would be sad.
You would be. That's why we have a Senate that gets to say yay or nay. But can I tell you, if you're a Democrat and you're unhappy about this right now, I think you have Harry Reid to blame. You have Harry Reid to blame. And I'll tell you why. Because he changed the rules when the Democrats controlled the Senate to require only 51 votes to get judicial nominees through. It didn't include Supreme Court justices. It was all the lower court justices, all the lower court judges. And Mitch McConnell, who was then the minority leader, said, you will rue the day. Because someday the Republicans will be in charge of this body, probably sooner than you think. And he urged him not to do it. Not to change these years of precedent in the Senate. And Harry Reid changed those rules, which is what led Mitch McConnell to, when the Republicans took over the Senate, to change them for Supreme Court justices, too. And that's why now they don't need a single Democrat. They can't filibuster. Whoever Trump nominates is almost certain to get in.
Well, and the other part of that, too, is last year when you said that the filibuster went away on the Supreme Court. That was a decision that started with Democrats saying we have to fight every Trump nominee, every Trump pick. And so Democrats chose to try to do a filibuster last year on Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court. And that's when Republicans said, oh, you're going to try that. We're going to do away with the filibuster altogether. Right. There's some strategic thought. There was some strategic thought back then, at least a debate among Democrats. Do you hold off on that? Do you hold off on that fight until it's Kennedy, until it could swing the court more dramatically than Gorsuch? Right. And now when you see the Kennedy thing happen, you revisit that and you wonder. It's maybe Republicans would have done it no matter what, but you do wonder.
But they don't have power anymore to use the rules of the Senate as they always did, right? Like with Bork and so on. Like they had power in the past to get rid of a nominee who they really didn't like. And now because the Republicans control the Senate, they just don't. Can we just talk about what this means, though? Because Justice Kennedy, I used to cover the High Court for Fox News for 3 years, and then I practiced law for 10 years. There's no question he's been a moderate on the court. He was appointed by a Republican. He was actually the Bork replacement. Right? When Bork got booted, remember that? Robert Bork, he was too controversial. Anyway, Kennedy came in. And he's proven to be a moderate. And the key vote on
That's why this is so
gay
important.
Marriage, on he's been the #1 protector of Roe v. Wade, a Republican appointee. And so there's a real question about what's going to happen now.
And this is, I think, why you get the reaction from the American public that you're getting, because these issues resonate with so many people. Sometimes the Supreme Court can make rulings and they're obscure and don't matter. And what we're talking about here are things that really matter to a lot of Americans, whether it's Roe v. Wade, whether you are for it or against it. And there are people in this country that are passionately against that decision, and they finally see an opening. What about same-sex marriage? It has changed the way we think about the institution, the legal institution in this country. Affirmative action.
And the dissent in that case, Obergefell, the gay marriage case, was vehement. So the justices who are still on that court, who disagreed with the decision, are now about to gain, we presume, a fifth vote, right? A person who sees things as Kennedy was the one who wrote that opinion. He was the one, he was lauded by gay and lesbian rights groups, and now he's going. And the odds of President Trump appointing somebody who is farther to the left than Kennedy are zero.
But the thing about Kennedy also, I mean, he wasn't always, he's not always voting on the left, right? I mean, he, as you say, he's a moderate, and he sometimes voted in ways in the Muslim ban decision that Democrat left would, did not like. I think the thing about him that, again, going back to my rule of law point, is most frightening is Kennedy was someone that you did trust at the end of the day would look at the law and not decide based on ideology. And I think what, a lot of people are afraid of is that Trump predictably is going to nominate someone who's more ideological and is going to vote along those lines.
I can speak to this as a lawyer who, I mean, legally, I would say I'm much more aligned with the right on judges. I just am, because at heart, I believe the originalist intent, the people who look at the Constitution as it was first written, makes more sense to me.
Okay.
But I can say I don't think it's ideological. I think it's people who are further aligned with how the Constitution was originally written and believe that if you want things like gay marriage and so on, you go to the legislatures and make it happen. It's not to say I'm opposed to the gay marriage decision or anything else, but I just don't think it's okay to say Kennedy was an ideologue. I think he was further, more closely aligned. And I think the left believes in a living, breathing Constitution that evolves and changes. And that's a legitimate point of view. It's just, it depends on what it is. I mean, one thing for the record, can I tell you, Justice Scalia, the most conservative or one of them on the court, he died. That's why we have Gorsuch, was best friends with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Probably the biggest liberal on the court. There is room, those two set a great example for how you can be ideologically opposed when it comes to legal interpretation or politics and still love one another. Wouldn't it be nice if we could remember that as this process goes forward? Listen.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.